there, and welcome to a special edition of Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos, coming to you this evening live from just north of downtown Toronto. I'm here at the hotel where the Prime Minister has convened his federal cabinet. They've been meeting this afternoon. They will meet later into the evening. And tomorrow it was the Prime Minister himself, though, who kicked things off with some news, saying that he had spoken at length with U.S. President Donald Trump Monday night. Have a listen.
But we have real issues. Without question, we have real issues in steel, in aluminum, in forest products, in autos, potentially in pharma, copper, some other sectors. I last spoke to the president Monday evening. We spoke at length on a wide range of issues, including on trade, but geopolitical, other issues, labor issues, etc. It was a good conversation. Don't expect immediate white smoke on one of these strategic sectors, but that's the type of conversation that we're having.
That is Prime Minister Mark Carney just ahead of the federal cabinet meeting that is taking place here just north of Toronto. I'm here with my colleague, CTV National News correspondent Judy Trinh. So some news to drop. Very tight-lipped meeting around here. No one's talking about anything really, except for the Prime Minister, who indicated, surprisingly, to reporters who were gathered here, that he spoke to the President on Monday night. Everyone I talked to around here who is associated with the Prime Minister says it's good news. They're talking.
That's right.
But no indication that there is some sort of concrete deal on sector-specific tariffs in close sight.
That's right, and that's why the Prime Minister said don't expect any white smoke. So what we learned was that at the same time that this cabinet meeting is going on, the top officials from the Privy Council are meeting with top U.S. officials in Washington to discuss this trade deal. And what is interesting, Vashi, is the timing of it all, right? Because we know that CUSMA or USMCA expires July 1st as in its current form. But 270 days before that, according to the agreement, the U.S. has to put out a call for a public consultation. So when it does that, the U.S. Trade Office has to put out a notice basically outlining its concerns. So we see in paper an idea of exactly what areas of trade the Trump administration wants to change. And you know what date 270 days ahead of July 1st is? That puts us smack at the first week of October. So we are expecting movement from the Americans. So when Trump says that he wants to reopen it, that process is starting very quickly, and the cabinet here, Carney's cabinet, has to be prepared.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that, right, in their focus here. Certainly they're talking about what those negotiations look like moving forward, the strategy that they're going to employ. Again, very tight-lipped about that. I think what we can discern from the Prime Minister's comments on that call is that all the conversation right now revolves around those very punishing steel and aluminum, copper, auto sector tariffs, which are outside of what CUSMA covers. But it also necessitates a refocus, and we're going to talk to a pollster who spoke to them in a moment about this, on sort of this idea, like, we've accepted that Trump is going to put some damage onto our economy and that create a lot of uncertainty. We've got to focus on the stuff that's going on here. To that end, let me just play for you a quick clip, because the budget's coming in October. They're talking about that. Some of the clip is in French, but what the Prime Minister said is quite astounding in my view. He called the budget that's coming an austerity budget, but also an investment budget. Take a listen.
C'est un budget d'austérité et d'investissement en même temps. Et ça, c'est possible si on a une discipline.
So I was listening to that, Judy, and thinking, just picture a conservative in government saying that a few years ago, right? Like, people would be up in arms, calling a budget an austerity budget. What does that tell you about what the conversation over the next day and a half around that and other issues is going to be like?
It's going to be about tough choices. We know that every federal department has been doing a review of their costs and expenses, trying to figure out where they can pare back, where they can cut. So I think this is the Prime Minister preparing us for public service cuts, preparing us for possible program cuts. But he's saying it that we need to do this because what was also interesting was that he said the federal government is basically grown too much. It's been growing at 7% every year for the past 10 years, which is double the amount the economy is going. And he's saying that that is unsustainable. So we need to rein in costs. So these discussions will center on difficult decisions in terms of where the cuts and where the paring back will be, and also where the investment should be. He has to find funds to invest. So where does he want to do this? We know, as you've reported, Vashi, that there's interest in LNG, right? So where are those national projects? A national project office has been started. We know there's a CEO, but they have yet to actually announce one. So that is also on the table in terms of what will be discussed.
I'm just dying to see what is austerity and investment at the same time. Anyway, Judy, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll be checking in with you throughout the evening. Judy Trin is a CTV National News correspondent. As I mentioned, there are a number of people presenting to Cabinet while they're here this afternoon. The Cabinet and the Prime Minister heard specifically from the pollsters who run Leger polling. Let me show you their latest numbers before we get to talking to them. They have the Liberals out at 46%. These numbers are from August 15th. The Conservatives at 36%, the Bloc at 7%, the NDP at 6%. They were here to give the federal government their read, the Cabinet rather, their read on the public mood. Sébastien Dallaire is the Executive Vice President of Leger. Hi, Mr. Dallaire. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I appreciate you making the time. So you're fresh out of this meeting and presenting to Cabinet. We just showed the latest numbers that are public from Leger. I know you had more recent data to share with Cabinet. Is there anything significant that has moved in the past few weeks?
In short, no.
Okay.
Things are pretty stable, which in the current context is good news for the government because they're ahead in the polls, they had strong showing in the election, and since then, Canadians remain satisfied with the government. They still give the government the benefit of the doubt, despite the fact that we're hearing about, we want more movement, we want to see more action. Canadians are still saying we think we have the right government in place. As of now, that's what we're measuring.
And by what margin? Like approximately, if you were to, and not necessarily numerically, but approximately if you were to say like a big majority, a slim majority, what is your sense of, are the bulk of Canadians okay with the status quo?
What we're saying is a significant majority are satisfied with the government. So that's always a sign that the government's ceiling is a bit higher. So right now, in terms of voting intentions, it's really close to where they were in the election. The Conservatives are down a little bit, so there's a bit more of a gap. But Canadians are generally satisfied. When we ask them, is the government exceeding your expectations, meeting your expectations? We see that a majority are saying, well, they're kind of meeting. So it's a plurality saying they meet our expectations. A small group say they exceed, but expectations were very high coming in. So if you're in the government, it's probably good news for Canadians to say, well, it's pretty much what I expected, because their expectations were very high, and it's only a minority who say, no, they're below expectations.
And based on what you survey, what is that informed by? Is it largely a Carney factor? Is it a Trump thing? Is it the stuff that keeps us up at night? Like what do you think is informing their advantage at this point in time?
What we've seen from the very beginning when Mark Carney appeared on the scene, became the leader, is the government is really seen as the government of the economy. It's about protecting Canada's economy against the threats coming from Donald Trump, and that remains the case. So the key issues for voters are mostly related to the economy and cost of living. And the government is very well positioned in those regards. And as you mentioned, Donald Trump also plays a factor because Canadians see what's happening with every country around the world, and the expectations have softened a little bit, saying, well, do we expect Canada to really sign a comprehensive deal to avoid tariffs? Maybe not. It's about half and half. Canadians are very divided on this. So they kind of understand that Donald Trump is difficult to deal with and that he may change his mind one day or the next. So Canadians really give the government some leeway in dealing with Donald Trump.
And what about in other issues? Because if we went back a year and you and I were having this conversation, it wouldn't be Donald Trump that topped everybody's list. It would have been most certainly, I think, inflation, affordability more largely, and housing, crime, immigration. The stuff that is still important, it just doesn't seem to rise to the same, necessarily all the time to the same level. What is your sense of whether how much leeway the government is going to get on those other issues, and how much of a potential vulnerability it could be for them in the coming months?
What's different are two things. The two main priorities are basically the same than those from a year ago. Inflation, affordable housing. So those two issues are still very important, especially cost of living, affordability in general. That's extremely important. So this is very similar. Obviously it's in a different context because of the election of Donald Trump, the tariffs, concerns about the state of the economy. So the context is different, the issues are the same. But in terms of the other one, so if we think of immigration, it's a little bit lower down the list. It remains an important issue. Canadians still want to hear about it, but it's not as important as it used to be. And because of what's happening in the United States, it's also a trickier terrain to talk about because Canadians are not necessarily comfortable with the way immigration is being approached by the American administration. So on immigration, it's kind of a different ballgame now than what it was a year ago.
So if you take just more largely affordability and housing, what is your advice to the government as they head into the fall sitting about the seriousness with which they should, both from a communications but maybe more significantly from a policy perspective and a legislative perspective, approach those issues?
It would be, well, as you said, it's talking about affordability, talking about housing as well, the price of housing, and less about the tariffs themselves, more about the impact of tariffs and what we can do to make things better for Canadians. So the focus is about making things better for Canadians. That's what Canadians want to know, and we see this in the shifting priorities in our polling, that Canadians are coming back to this. Like, okay, we know there are tariffs, we know there are threats coming from Trump, but now this is part of the new normal. What are you doing to make my life easier, to make things more affordable for me? So this is what the government should be focusing on.
And is it your sense that Canadians have accepted this as the new normal? Like, is that what your polling is showing?
Is it accepted or more resignation maybe that this is the way it's going to be for the near future? So we don't have control over what's happening in the United States, so let's focus on what we can control here in Canada.
And how worried are they about the future? Like, often we've talked about like concern about the future direction of the country and how that sometimes correlates to who they view as the best person or the best party to be in power. Like, what is your assessment right now of the level of concern about the future of the country?
It's probably very high. We didn't ask questions about this, but we see as we're tracking items on, are we going in the right direction, wrong direction? The numbers remain mostly in the red, despite the fact that it's a little bit better than it was a year ago when people were very unhappy with the government at the time. Now with the change, the numbers are a little bit better, but we see that still there's a big proportion of Canadians who remain uncertain over the direction this country is going. They are concerned over what's going to take place. Of course, we haven't covered anything related to AI, for example, but all these things are feeding. We've been in this for 5 years. We've been in a bit of a state of what I like to call a polycrisis. So it's multiple crises kind of all wrapped into one. Sometimes it's hard for voters to really pick out what is on their mind aside from the immediate affordability issue, but there's a general sense that things are not right, and that hasn't really changed. And in a way, the arrival of Donald Trump is an extra layer on top of what was already a bit of a gloomy feeling before.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. I'm out of time. Thank you for your time, Mr. Dallaire. Pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Sebastien Dallaire is with Leger Polling. He briefed federal cabinet this afternoon. We're going to talk about what you just heard and what is and isn't happening here at cabinet with our front bench a little bit later on in the program. We've got Sharon Carr, Genevieve Tomney, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Scamsey up later this evening. First, though, we're going to take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, we'll go live with the immigration critic for the Conservatives. Michelle Rempel-Garner will be with me to talk about the Conservatives' new pitch to completely get rid of the temporary foreign workers program. We're back in a moment with Michelle Rempel-Garner.
In most cases, I don't think they do need temporary foreign workers. I think they hire them because they can pay them less. And it's that simple. They don't want to pay the prevailing wage to the Canadian worker. And so they hire someone from abroad who might be in a desperate situation and willing to take less.
That program has a role. It has to be focused in terms of its role. And it's part of what we're reviewing. It's part of what we will be discussing, how well the temporary foreign worker program is working and how our overall immigration system is working. We've been absolutely clear as a government that we want, and we're putting in place policies so that the overall level of immigration as a proportion of the population will decline from around 7% today to around 5% several years from now.
Welcome back to a special edition of Power Play. I'm coming to you this evening from where you just saw the Prime Minister speak at a hotel just north of downtown Toronto. That's where federal cabinet is huddling. The Prime Minister there responding to an announcement from federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who is pitching the idea of getting rid of the temporary foreign worker program for a number of reasons, many of which we're going to get into with our next guest. Michelle Rempel-Garner is the immigration critic for the Federal Conservative Party, and she's with us live now. Hi, Ms. Rempel-Garner. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
So when I listened to the leader of your party, Mr. Poilievre, today make the pitch for getting rid of this program, a lot of that was predicated on what is, factually a very, very high youth unemployment rate. My question to you is, how does your party know that TFWs are the cause of that high unemployment rate among this country's youth? How do you know that?
Well, it's in Statistics Canada data. We've had major institutions like the C.D. Howe Institute talk about this. And it's also anecdotal. I mean, there are so many jobs that are now being offered to temporary foreign workers first, while we have stories all summer of, kids putting out hundreds of resumes and not getting a single callback. There's been a lot of discussions as well over the last several weeks about how the first job is disappearing as the economy sort of teeters on recessionary territory and some of the changes with artificial intelligence. So this isn't a shocker. But it is a shock that the government is still persisting in allowing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to enter the country through this labor stream, and it needs to stop.
So a couple of things that I want to take out of that. The first is on, again, like how you know for sure this is the cause. And I, did as much research as I could today to try and figure out, because I think anyone would look at the numbers, see how high the unemployment rate is for Canada's youth, and assume, given the rate of temporary foreign workers, that is probably a big part of it, but I can't find any evidence to support that. I know that it is a part, I know that there is correlation, but I can't see that it is the entire causation. And the reason I ask about the difference of that is because what you're advocating for is not like tampering down, much stricter regulation of the program, changes to the program. You want to get rid of it entirely. Wouldn't you have to know that this is the cause of the entirety of the problem to get rid of it?
Okay, well, look at it this way. Why is a Mucho Burrito in Mark Carney's riding issuing a temporary foreign work job offer at $36 an hour when there's tens of thousands of unemployed youth in Ottawa? That's a fact, right? So there's a problem there. The Canadians' jobs should go to Canadians. And it's not, the youth job crisis is a big reason for the abolition of this program. It also, we know, it suppresses wages, right? It takes away opportunities from Canadians, but it's also been rife with abuse. I mean, the United Nations likened it to modern day slavery. So the evidence is clear to anybody looking at it. This program needs to go for so many reasons. And it's about time that Canadians, government policy stands up for Canadian workers, especially young Canadians that can't find a job right now. And that's why this program needs to go.
Yeah, certainly I wouldn't want to leave anyone with the impression that the program is running well or that, you cite the UN reports, for example. I've covered them for a lot of years, and their primary concern is the treatment of a lot of these individuals, that there's no path, for example, to permanent residency, that they're tied to a singular employer. But right. I guess I wonder why it's necessary to get rid of the whole thing. Because on the one hand, you do have the points that you make. On the other hand, you have a lot of businesses, and I understand your criticism that maybe some aren't using it altruistically, but some genuinely do need them. I was listening to the head of the CFIB, which represents small businesses, saying, for example, are you going to get someone who lives in downtown Toronto, a young unemployed person, to move to Estevan, Saskatchewan, where I'm sure both of us have been, to work in a pizza parlor? Like, that's not always feasible, and there is a need in the labor market in certain instances for this. So why do you need to get rid of all of it?
I don't buy that argument. That sounds like the argument of, lobby groups, frankly, right? Some of these jobs are going at like $36, $37 an hour. These companies have been relying on them as a crutch. And if the program didn't exist, then the government and businesses would be focusing on labor mobility. The reality is this program has normalized a low-paid, temporary foreign underclass that, as you mentioned, is kind of indentured labor, right? They're often tied to one employer. So, I don't buy that argument at all. And if Mark Carney's serious about building, a so-called one Canadian economy, then labor mobility needs to be part of that equation, right? And the temporary foreign worker program is probably the #1 impediment to incentivizing employers and governments to focus on labor mobility strategies. So I don't buy any of those arguments whatsoever. And certainly I don't think any young person who has been turned down hundreds of times for even a job interview would agree with that. I just think it's spin, and I don't think that these guys have a leg to stand on, frankly.
So why is it spin now? But both you and I were around in the last few years of the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government. It was at the tail end of that government in 2015. I remember Pierre Poilievre, who was the minister overseeing employment, I think it was at the time, who was getting tons of questions. There was a big controversy at the time about the TFW program and how the Conservative government at that time was running it. There was, your government at the time conceded, yes, there are issues, but we can fix them. We can make some changes that address this, and therefore changing it, not abolishing it at the time, was seen as a solution. Why was that okay then and not now?
Well, you're right. We absolutely put in major, significant reforms. And what was the first thing that the Liberals did upon forming government in 2015? They reversed all those changes. And they made it way easier for employers to use and abuse this program and its workers, #1. #2, arguably the Liberals have driven the Canadian economy into, the toilet. Our productivity numbers are in the toilet. We have a youth jobs crisis. People can't afford houses, right, because of supply shortages, too many people coming into the country in a short period of time. And anybody who's walked into an emergency room recently has also realized that healthcare has not kept up with immigration numbers. So I would argue that the context is a lot different, but nonetheless, the Liberals made a choice to, just juice the problems with the program. And it's got to go now. It's got to stop. We have a youth jobs crisis, and Canadian jobs have to go to Canadian workers, and the government has to start standing up and betting on our kids in this country, not allowing Tim Hortons to keep hiring people in urban areas for jobs that could go to students.
Are you sure, though, final question to you, though, if that program were to be abolished, that the things you say it's causing would be rectified? Because even when you mention issues with housing or issues with hospitals, the pace of immigration has been, on one side, on the temporary side, but also on the more permanent side. On the temporary side, the bulk of that side is made up of international students, through which there have been some policy changes. It wasn't temporary foreign workers. Like, if you remove temporary foreign workers from this country, are all of those services all of a sudden going to be better for Canadians? Are Canadians going to get all the jobs? Like, how can you be sure of that?
Across the political spectrum, and if you talk to anybody in this country, it is very obvious that the Liberals have set immigration levels too high. They have let too many people into the country in too short a period of time for housing, jobs, and health care to keep up. That's just a fact. You know, I've been working all summer with my colleagues on a series of reforms that we are going to be recommending to the government over the coming weeks on immigration. This is just the first of them. The system is seriously broken. It doesn't help Canadians. It abuses people that come to this country to work. We don't blame them. We blame the Liberal government. And it has to change. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? People can't access health care, they can't get jobs, and they can't get housing right now. So the brakes have to be pumped, and this program is like a no-brainer to end. It suppresses wages, it takes away first opportunities from our young Canadians, and it abuses workers. So it's got to go, and that's why we started with this one today.
When you say you're going to propose other changes, I mean, to be fair to the Liberals, you're absolutely right that numbers, you know, most economists said got out of control. I remember questioning them over and over again until eventually they did make, you know, what I think you could be characterized as pretty significant policy changes, even on the permanent side. How much further would you reduce immigration, and what's your solution for the labor shortage, for example, as a result?
Well, first of all, I'm just going to push back on that last statement. We have one of the most profound youth unemployment crises that this country has ever seen. So the first question for the government has to be, how are we going to match unemployed Canadian youth with jobs, particularly with the economy being, you know, in the poor state that it is? So, you know, I'm going to push back on that for a second. And then, yes, there's other reforms that need to happen. But, you know, the immigration minister, the Liberal immigration minister, has been MIA this summer. She's not here talking to you about major reforms. And frankly, the levels that the Liberals have set, you know, they're still at record highs. They're way too high. So, you know, stay tuned. I hope you and I can have several chats more in the future. But the temporary foreign worker program, I think across the political spectrum, there is agreement that it has to end, and that's why we were out today. We are going to be putting a lot of pressure on the government to end it in the House of Commons this fall.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. Appreciate your time as always, Ms. Rempel-Garner. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle Rempel-Garner is the Federal Conservative Party's immigration critic. We did request an interview with the immigration minister here for the federal cabinet retreat, and our request was denied. We're going to take a short commercial break. On the other end of that break, our front bench is here to talk about the pitch from Poilievre, as well as what is and isn't happening here at the federal cabinet. Back in a moment with our front bench.
We have trillions of dollars coming into our country. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be a very poor nation, and we would be taken advantage of by every other nation in the world, friend and foe. We're not going to let that happen. And we have a very, very big case in the Supreme Court. Our country has a chance to be unbelievably rich again, but it can also be unbelievably poor again. If we don't win that case, our country is going to suffer so greatly.
That's U.S. President Donald Trump speaking at the White House about what else, tariffs, and the effectiveness, as he views it, of them as fiscal policy. It's also part of the discussion here where I am, at a hotel just north of downtown Toronto. This is where federal cabinet has huddled throughout the afternoon and into this evening, and they will also meet tomorrow. They are, of course, talking about our trade war with the United States, but also other stuff on the fall legislative agenda. Let's bring in the front bench to talk a little bit more about what is and isn't on the agenda at this federal cabinet. I'm not going to call it retreat. They refuse to call it retreat. A planning forum. Sharon Carr is with us tonight. She's the former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau, now a principal at Navigator. Genevieve Tomney is a principal at GT & Co. She worked in the office of former Liberal Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne. Jamie Ellerton is a conservative strategist and the founder and principal of Canaptas. And Sebastian Skamsky was former director of media relations to conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Good to see you. Sharon, I thought we spoke with one of the pollsters who briefed cabinet today, and I thought one of the more germane things that he told us and that he conveyed to cabinet was people in Canada have largely accepted Trump and that he is a big part of the story, but they are now focused more on what are you going to do for us? What would you take out of that? What should cabinet be taking out of that over the next few days?
I think it's what we've expected. I think the narrative of Donald Trump has taken over for quite some time, and it's going to take over for the entirety of his mandate. But what Canadians are now seeing is that we have a leader who is dealing with him, or at least trying to deal with him in his constant, I would say, manic changes of tariffs and no tariffs and additional tariffs. But what Canadians want to see now is, okay, well, we're going to have to deal with this uncertainty for the foreseeable future. What is it that the Canadian government is going to do to make sure that our economy is stable? What are we going to do to be more sovereign? How are we going to do everything that we can possible to ensure that our jobs are not impacted, that we don't have a recession, and continue to let Donald Trump have his tantrums and do what he's doing, but also focus on jobs, productivity, and everything here at home, affordability, housing. So I think the polling is showing that people are able to now acknowledge two things at one time.
And so what do you think the impact of that on the strategy, let's say, Jamie, the government brings into the fall session? Like, what should they be talking about here today from a tangible perspective that would address that for Canadians?
I think what the strategy needs to be is actually what are you delivering, and it's less on the day-to-day comms exercise. Like for what this happening in Toronto today, I actually don't think this is comms. They have to say something. Cabinet's meeting, might as well like show a bit of the work you're doing. But this needs to be how Ottawa actually works and delivers on programs. This is not about just announcing new money for things. This is actually about getting stuff out the door so that in the weeks and months ahead, people actually feel some of those changes coming through. I think you're seeing Mark Carney, I still think, enjoy a bit of a honeymoon period. People, I think, generally like him and trust him and think he's competent and capable. But that doesn't mean the machinery of Ottawa is matching what the Prime Minister wants it to be doing. And so really, I think this comes down to the machinery of Ottawa and making sure the Cabinet is on board, getting a reminder as to what the priorities are, not being distracted by shiny objects and whatever stakeholders coming through with whatever fantastic initiative they're trying to advance, and delivering on these core issues. I think the first budget, which we're also expecting this fall, is going to really lay the groundwork for what is to be. And if you're following conventional political wisdom, he's going to put any tough pills that need to be swallowed in this fall budget to probably then bookend it with something happier in the spring and show that they have something to actually do. If they fall back onto kind of just the high-level platitudes and the scaremongering to try and drive the wedge that worked for them in the campaign, I don't think Canadians are going to buy that a second time. And so they really just have to deliver real results.
I'm glad you brought up the budget because we know that they're talking about that here. Genevieve, I want to ask you about something that the Prime Minister said today. He said it in French, but it was like, to me, pretty jaw-dropping in that he called it an austerity budget. He said it's going to be an austerity budget and an investment budget. I can only imagine the reaction if a Conservative Prime Minister had used the word austerity as freely. Like, what do you think that was an accident, deliberate, and what do you take from that?
I see it as an opportunity. I think that Canadians fundamentally agree that they have elected the right Prime Minister to be focused on, as the Prime Minister would say, the things that we can control on the domestic economy. I think the opportunity, and yeah, when we hear the word austerity, we all kind of go, and I think Canadians feel that way too. The reality is that 2/3 of Canadians still say that affordability and cost of living is the biggest issue for them. So I think that the opportunity there is to really make that connection between the big economic picture and big moves that the Prime Minister and his government are planning to make and what it actually means for people in their day-to-day lives. Because the reality is the cost of housing is still high. The cost of groceries is still high. People are feeling squeezed at all angles. And you can't lose that connection between the big economic picture and what people are actually feeling in their pocketbooks. And I think that's where this narrative has to go next.
I guess I wonder, Sebastian, I think Genevieve is totally right about it. You know, you have to communicate it and do things in a way that impacts people's actual lives versus just like the macro aggregate picture of the economy. But when they use the word austerity, like I am very curious to see what does that actually translate? Because the Prime Minister has also said he's not going to cut transfers. He's not going to cut program, you know, he indicated there didn't seem to be any big program cuts on the table. I don't know how you get to austerity without something like that.
Well, I think vastly Canadians have learned a valuable lesson in the fact that the Prime Minister says a lot of things. He does very few of them. I'm glad you pointed out, of course, that this is not a cabinet retreat. It is a planning forum, as if this Prime Minister needs more time to plan and think and contemplate. He has been doing a lot of that in the last 6 months as Prime Minister. He has been doing very little of the actual doing. What happened to all the baby build stuff? What happened to all of this commitment to build these projects and deliver on major national unity opportunities? I mean, whatever he says right now, whether it's in French or English, we also know that changes what he's actually saying depending on the language he uses. But whatever it is that he says, I think we're waiting to see the results. And so far, I think Canadians are left very disappointed, and we've seen that as your pollsters have spoken to before. There's a real anxiety about the economy, about inflation, about jobs. All of these things are within the Prime Minister's purview. He has seemingly presented to Canadians a different face than what he is not delivering. And I think we're seeing more of what we have seen of the past 10 years of the Liberal government, which is stagnation and bad outcomes for everyday Canadians.
What do you really think? No, Sharon, I'm going to give you 20 seconds because you look, she's smiling the whole time you're talking. So go for it. You get the last word and I'll take a break.
I love Sebastian so much, but guys, it's been 6 months. There's going to be things getting done. We just heard last week that the Major Projects Office is being set up in Alberta and being run by Don Farrell, who is someone who is very well respected in the industry to get things done, help get TMX done. So time is going to tell, but it's been 6 months. So let's not put out the celebratory conservative banner just yet.
Everybody's faces are like the meme that I want to keep with me forever. Stay right there. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to keep this conversation going, and we're going to get our front bench to weigh in on Pierre Poilievre's pitch to get rid of the temporary foreign worker program. Back in a moment with that conversation.
The principle is very simple. Canadian jobs for Canadian workers. Canada first, Canada always. That's why Conservatives are calling on the Carney government to permanently scrap the temporary foreign worker program and to stop issuing visas for any new temporary foreign workers coming into the country.
That program has a role. It has to be focused in terms of its role. And it's part of what we're reviewing. As a whole, it's clear that we can improve our overall immigration policies. We're working on that, and we're setting clear goals to adjust.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's pitch today to get rid of the temporary foreign workers program, followed there by Prime Minister Mark Carney's response. I'm here with our front bench, Sharon Carr, Genevieve Tomney, Sebastian Skamsky, and Jamie Ellerton, to talk a little bit more about the politics behind all of this. Jamie, I wanted to start with you. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I track sort of the Conservatives over the summer and their press conferences, they have definitely leaned harder into the issue of immigration. I would say capped off by today's announcement to get rid of the TFW program completely. Do you agree that that's been the case? And if so, what do you think is motivating that? What is the strategy behind it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, Vashi, and I think there's kind of two things at play here. One, we don't know when their election is going to be, and there are a lot of people who feel shut out from this current economy, who have concerns about immigration and impressions of the system, regardless of what the facts are, impressions of the current system. We know that the previous government lost control of the immigration system. This government is now trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and Conservatives need something to keep their supporters engaged, as well as those who voted Conservative for the first time, to get that 41% mark that Pierre delivered in the last election, but wasn't enough to keep them engaged in the Conservative fold. So I think part of what you're seeing here is trying to talk to people on issues that allow them to connect with them while the government's doing what the government's doing. Part of this is a bit of a South Park meme of like, they took our jobs and trying to wrap ourselves in the flag, because we know that when it was a battle of who could better wrap themselves in the flag, Canadians chose Mark Carney last time around. And so I think they're trying trying to create some space there. And on the other piece of this, I think they are looking at how the temporary foreign worker program is being abused. I think they're trying to take a hammer to it by scrapping it altogether. I worked for Minister of Immigration Jason Kenney back in the day, and there are a lot of people who will tell you Canadians won't take the jobs that temporary foreign workers are straight up doing. There's a reason why today they announced they weren't going to get rid of the agricultural stream. It's because Canadians will not take those jobs. And so I think they're using a blunt force to try and generate headlines to talk about this issue and give them a rhetorical frame to fill. But I don't think this is like fully baked policy, and I don't think they're trying to actually do that. And they're trying to talk to the Canadians who voted for it in the last election to kind of continue to say, hey, we hear you're struggling. We want to fix things that in theory they're trying to present will make better, but in practice may not be the case.
Genevieve, what do you think the strategy is behind leaning further into immigration, capped off with an announcement like today? And what are the potential pitfalls in your view of doing so?
Yeah, well, I fully agree with Jamie that this was a half-baked policy designed to get headlines. I mean, this is part of Mr. Poilievre's ongoing struggle to stay relevant right now. And I know, Vashi, you asked the critic about this. When you talk to academics or you talk to economists and people who actually study the youth unemployment issue, the thing that they point to as the main driver of youth unemployment in Canada is the weakness in our economy. And that is exactly what this Prime Minister was elected to come in and start to address, and what he has spent the last 6 months focused on in terms of, getting us to the point where we have a stronger domestic economy and really focusing on that. So I think that this is really creating a bit of a sideshow, and I think it can be damaging. What we've seen is that there have already been a lot of restrictions and changes made to the policies around immigration, and I think it's prudent to wait and see what the knock-on effects of those changes are going to be before we make any more.
Yeah, I think, Sebastian, a couple of things as I was listening to the press conference today and Ms. Rempel-Garner and all of you that come to mind. I do think that the former Liberal government was very late to the issue of immigration policy changes, kind of like was forced there. And we're still seeing some impacts of that. So they remain somewhat vulnerable on it. And I also think that they haven't talked enough about how hard it is for youth to find a job and how high that unemployment rate is. At the same time, it's like a fine line for the Conservatives to walk to blame all of these issues on immigration. I think there is no hard evidence to back that up in its entirety. Is it part of the problem? Sure. Is it the whole problem? No one has shown me any proof that it is.
Well, first of all, I would say I don't think anyone is suggesting that Ms. Rempel-Garner or Pierre Poilievre are blaming entirely on this. It is, though, a significant problem and a significant chunk of the issue. Look, just before the break, Sharon said, it's only been 6 months. Let's not assess the outcomes. But in those 6 months, when Prime Minister Carney was Prime Minister, in fact, the Liberals had allowed 105,000 temporary foreign worker permits. That is a staggering number. So in those 6 months, he took action to employ temporary foreign workers and put Canadians in the backseat. I think the example cited by our immigration critic about companies across the country who are requesting the assistance of temporary foreign workers for really entry-level jobs is concerning, at most generous, and it begs the question of why this program is even in existence when it is very clearly hurting the population that is struggling the most. I will also point out that while the boomers of Mr. Carney's coalition put their elbows together in support of him, it is the young Canadians who had been suffering so greatly after 10 years of Liberal rule who have been really on the outs, who are feeling completely disconnected from society, disconnected from the workforce. Those are the people that are increasingly supporting Mr. Poilievre and common sense policies like this. Let's give those Canadians a leg up. Let's let them have a fair kick at the can when it comes to starting their career. And I think that's really what this policy is about, and I think it'll resonate very strongly with those that it affects so closely.
Yeah, I do understand the point, Sharon, about sort of like the young, and we saw it in the demographic shifts in the last election, right? the younger generations and the frustrations that they feel, and those numbers from Stats Can about unemployment back that up. I just also think that there are potential vulnerabilities in casting immigration as even close to any kind of a silver bullet.
It 100% is, and listening to that interview and watching that interview that you did with MP Rempel, quite frankly, was infuriating. I'm going to be quite frank and honest. We are the Conservative Party, and Pierre Poilievre and MP Rempel are treading a very dangerous line of what I'm going to call a dog whistle of racism. Because if you want to have a conversation about the fact that we have an issue with immigration, we do, not because they're immigrants and they're coming in and taking away. It's because our society and our system hasn't kept up. We don't have enough housing. We don't have enough resource put in place to help everybody. So let's have that conversation. But to say it's foreign workers that are taking away jobs from Canadians and the solution is youth, to me is simplistic. It's nonsense. And honestly, it's like, let's talk about taxi drivers, for example, in major cities. There is a reason why taxi drivers look like my skin tone, because unfortunately there are people who come to this country who are willing to do jobs that we're not going to get other people to do. So if you think that students are going to do that, I think it's completely a sledgehammer policy they're trying to put into place. There's a demographic, there is regional considerations, and students are not going to solve it. And quite frankly, I found it offensive, because what they're doing is they're tapping into the people, and I'm not saying all Conservatives, but Pierre Poilievre has tapped into a base of Conservative voters who have made extremely racist comments against immigrants. We saw that when we saw universities and colleges abusing foreign student attendance in their schools, and we see it online. And what they're doing right now is race baiting, and I find it, quite frankly, offensive.
I got 30 seconds for Sebastian, because I gave you the rebuttal last time. I'll give you it. The only thing I would quickly say is I understand those concerns, but they were clearly lying the blame at the feet of the Liberal policy at this point in time. But I do understand the concerns. Sebastian, last word to you.
Sharon, I mean, so much of that is absurd and I think so inaccurate on what is actually the truth. I'll remind you, it was the United Nations actually that looked at Canada's temporary foreign worker program and said that a lot of it is reminiscent of modern day slavery. So it is not just the Canadian youth who can't get jobs. It is also these people who are taking these jobs who are being often mistreated and who are working, being underpaid, and it's effectively indentured servitude. So I very strongly reject that premise.
No. Okay, we will keep the debate going. I appreciate everyone. I'm so sorry. The commercial hits hard. My apologies. We got to pay the bills. Thank you to our front bench, Sharon Carr, Genevieve Tomney, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Scamsey. We'll take a quick commercial break. We're back with more Power Play after that. We will have more coverage throughout the evening from just north of downtown Toronto as the cabinet meeting continues. We're anticipating any moment some ministers might emerge, and who knows, maybe they'll talk to reporters. Our coverage continues in a little bit. Thanks so much for watching Power Play tonight. I appreciate it. Good to be with you. See you soon.